Back in March, we were all excited to get 3 weeks off of school. But this has accelerated to a higher degree, as we know schooling is the key to success. As Sir Francis Bacon says, knowledge is power. But sadly, access and restrictions to this can apply. Stanford of 2020 tells us that ever since the 1970s, there's been an education achievement gap due to certain factors such as economics, segregation, and schooling characteristics. While the pandemic has presented many challenges, one of them has been that education has been put under a microscope, and this gap has been exploited, allowing us to see exactly the problems that are happening. And because of this, we ask today's question: is online schooling widening the education gap? And ultimately, the answer is yes, for 3 key reasons. First, low-income families. Second, public school setbacks. And third, lack of resource. First, we can see that low-income families have a very high disadvantage when considering online schooling. The New York Times of August 29th, 2020 explains a couple of examples. For example, Natalie Cruz is a 3rd grader who has learning difficulties and a mother who works full-time as a nurse. Because of this, she is forced to work at her grandparents' house, where her grandparents are not completely fluent in English. Her mother can't afford a private tutor and can't afford the higher level schoolings that have more space to go into school. Because of this, she isn't being able to learn to the best of her ability. While 20 miles west of this, the Santos family attends a quality, high-performing school where they have the capabilities to be spread out. The mother is educated and works from home, giving private attention to her children and being able to afford private tutors and study pods for her sons. Because of these inequalities between low-income and high-income families, online schooling exploits this because they can't afford to pay for the extra attention that would be required to stay at the same levels within online schooling. Additionally, EconFact of April 21st, 2017 explains that the education gap has widened by 40% in the last 3 decades. And when looking further into it, we can see that the pandemic has exploited this even further because it is taking, again, education and putting it under a microscope. Not only do low-income families have a disadvantage, but there is also a disadvantage between the public schools and the setbacks that come with it. Public schools don't have the same resources as some of the private schools do. And the Pew Research Center of August 29th of 2020 explains that many private schools have the resources to stay open because they have more space and can space out their students and can pay more for teachers to give specific attention to certain pods of students. Public schools do not have this extent of ability to spread out all of their students because they have more students that they need to pay attention to. And as the Charleston City paper, December 16th of 2020 explains, that private schools are predicted to be on time. However, public schools have been predicted to be 3 months behind on the curriculum. Also, they don't have some of the resources that are provided at the private schools, allowing them to be set back even further. With the private schools being set back and low-income families being at a disadvantage, this ultimately leads to a lack of resource within certain areas of this widening education gap. The Pew Research Center of July 29th explains that specific areas with the most resource disadvantage are the rural areas, where internet access is not as easily addressed between certain families. Also, large families that may not be able to afford multiple devices of this technology have to share and allocate time between this one device for the whole family, making it even harder to stay on track. Politico of September 29th explains a couple specific examples. First, in Baltimore, 1 in 3 students, a total of 27,000, don't have access to technology in order to move on with their schooling. And 2 girls in California were seen using free Wi-Fi outside of a Taco Bell in order to move with their schooling because their family didn't have access to this Wi-Fi and weren't able to connect to their classes. This ultimately leads to dangers of per se the girls in California who were working outside of a Taco Bell and falling even more behind because of this lack of resource and not being able to connect with the online schooling that has become so prevalent to education. Ultimately, the education and the achievement gap is widening even more because of the global pandemic and online schooling. While we were excited about being off of school for 3 weeks in March, online schooling has made us see a perspective on this. And for the reasons provided of low-income families, public school setbacks, and the lack of resource, we see this being a key problem. And yes, the education gap is widening because of online schooling. Thank you.